This is, I think, a long question, but I think it's critical that we think about it. So, we're talking about carbon now, we're talking about climate change. You know, I teach those things, I'm not sure we've already lost that battle. But incorporated in that battle is the water battle. And you mentioned patriotism, which I think is tied to national defense. And one of the things we really need is water. And as we move forward in this climate change event that's happening, that I don't see how we can stop, is water. We all need water. You can live without your car, you can live without your television, you cannot live without water. When you talked about taxing resource depletion, water is one of these resources we are very seriously depleting. Maybe not as much in Connecticut, but we are. And it takes huge amounts of energy to get us water, and then we flush our toilets. It takes huge amounts of energy to get that back to the Connecticut River here in Middletown. So how do you deal with this future critical resource that I think we could still help, partly with climate change legislation, but also with thinking ahead to this really important natural resource?
Well, let me get back to my point, because it's an excellent point that you raise about water and resource depletion. And when we have the military come and testify on climate change, that's exactly what they talk about, because they will tell you that this is a national security issue because of what it means, not only for our country, but the impact that this has, and how they know from all their studies and research at our various war colleges how one thing leads to the other. So, I think it was Will Rogers who famously said, "I don't belong to any organized party, I'm a Democrat." We like to get down in the weeds, and we like to debate the issues, and we like to really make sure, and then we'll argue back and forth with one another. Jeremy said that Jeremy said that I'm the chairman of the Democratic Caucus. Within the Democratic Caucus, we have the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, the Blue Dogs, the New Dems, the Green Caucus, to name a few. And so, point is this. In the healthcare debate, people said what they're doing is having death panels. Death panels become something that people can pick up on very simply. In terms of messaging our arguments, as important as it is to get the issues right, it's equally important to take those messages that come from there and boil them down in a way that they can be understood so that the American people can get behind them. That's why I said patriotic. And to the extent we know how they're all interconnected, we're going to need a lot of people in our caucus. Believe me, we've had just about every messaging group known to mankind come through. But it comes down to the fact that you have to come up with a message that resonates with the people. And you have to be almost myopic about getting it across. Now, I don't think the climate change battle is lost. It certainly is discouraging, globally and here at home. But every issue worth fighting for has seen its ups and downs and has seen its low points. Some would argue that this is a civil rights issue. Somewhere out there with minds far more intelligent than mine, people, when they come together, and especially young and engaged people who today have means of communicating, my children say I'm digitally homeless, have ways of communicating that today are instant, now, and everywhere. If you take instant, now, and everywhere and combine that with our great cathedrals of knowledge and truth, our universities, then we can come up with the response that's needed and to push back. That's what an engaged democracy is all about. But your point about water is well taken. Hey, yes, sir.
I actually have a question right here. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Now, in terms of both getting us off of foreign oil and reducing our carbon emissions, conventional low-carbon energy technologies like natural gas and nuclear have a huge potential. I'm wondering if you see any potential in passing this bill for collaboration, kind of reaching across the cleaner.
We have to. I mean, that's we have to, and this is the other. It's an important issue because we basically need all hands on deck to make this transition. And as soon as you say that, we become almost unglued in terms of, which I thought one of the things about the energy bill that passed the House of Representatives that's fermenting over in Sleepy Hollow, I mean the Senate, was the fact that, you know, when you get Ed Markey talking about nuclear energy and including that as an accommodation of recognizing as to get from point A to point B, this is what we have to do, then we have the opportunity to move forward. I think we would have been better served if we were just straightforward with the American people and said, no, look, you know, especially after the debacle on Wall Street, that if we gave them certainty, every United Technologies, which is our largest manufacturer here and also happens to be a pretty good company, especially with respect to hydrogen fuel cells and geothermal technology, but their former CEO, George David, is on a global mission in terms of retrofitting all the buildings around the globe, but starting here in this country. Again, the savings and the monies that can come from that, but the need for us to embrace in a way that, you know, coal miners in West Virginia, you're not going to get those members to sign on to a bill that puts their people out of work, even though you see them coming out of the shafts with, you know, which you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out, well, you know, that doesn't look like a healthy environment to be working in. But yet, that's their job, that's their livelihood. And if we don't have a means to compensate them, we just simply aren't going to get their vote. It goes against the grain of all logic, but we have to come up with a system that allows that. I mean, I think it's pretty much, you have to laugh when you hear clean coal, but nonetheless, I've listened to Governor Schweitzer for a number of years talk about this. Nonetheless, we have to be willing to figure out how we get from point A to point B. Otherwise, to your point, Professor, we're going to miss the boat altogether. And so, in a system like that we exist in, and especially with so many outside influences that bear down on that system, all the more reason to make sure that we embrace the science, we embrace the technology, and we embrace the human dynamic and emotion that all comes from a job and how to help people through that. Yes, sir.
Representative Larson, first of all, thank you for what you're doing. And secondly, is there anything you can do to get President Obama to message to the American people about this more strongly so that we have more people who understand in a democracy what is at stake here?
I think there's, we wish the president, who is extraordinarily gifted and an incredible communicator, I wish the president would do, and I don't mean to stereotype this, do more fireside chats. I think we need that kind of discussion with the American people. He has a way, like President Clinton, like frankly President Reagan, and like President Kennedy, of communicating and explaining to the American people what the ramifications of all of this are. And you know, that does take time, and it is a matter of education, but it is, you know, a front and center part of the job. We certainly hope that the president does that. I mean, the health care bill that was enacted this past session, certainly a very necessary bill, but the messaging around it, or shall I say, the lack of messaging around it, and the fireside chats needed to connect with people on that, we're missing. And it's not that there aren't great anecdotes, and there aren't great stories that exist out there. I know, because I just spent 5 hours of listening to my colleagues who lost their elections come back and talk about what was happening on the ground, in their debates, in their neighborhoods, and what people had to say. So you're, again, spot on, and that certainly he has the bully pulpit. But what he also needs is to know that there's a groundswell out there, and that there are people, he can create one. Or what's that famous thing that John Kennedy said about the French lieutenant who said, "Which way are my troops going so I can get in front of them and lead?" Yeah. Well,
Would you agree that the youngest voters could, college students that are enlightened on this topic, can be a huge voice in Washington and all around the country?
Frankly, all the results aren't in from analyzing the vote that just took place, but it seems pretty clear and evident that the drop-off on college campuses in terms of the vote between 2008 and 2010, which historically in midterm elections is lower, but it was catastrophic to the issues, you know, in the light of, I think it was in Connecticut in some cases, I don't know what it will be here at Wesleyan, but Pell Grant recipients quadrupled, and proportionately the number of people coming out to vote based on 2010, which we think could have been higher. So the engagement that is needed to shift the vote from people that know better and are educated, that would stand up for Bob Englis, didn't come out to vote. And they didn't come out to vote all across the country. There weren't a greater number of Republicans that came out to vote. There were a lesser number of Democrats, and especially a lesser number of independents on our college campuses and registered Democrats who didn't come out to vote. So can they? Absolutely. Will they? And what is the motivating factor that will bring them to the polls? God only knows. There's enough skepticism about government and our system, and the system gets demeaned even more every 2 years. So, as a former history teacher, it breaks my heart to see what's happening. But it is the key. I mean, the key is right here in this room. And that's how I think we can create the change that we need. Well, listen, thank you very much. I wish I could stay longer.